The letter arrived on a Tuesday, a cold corporate summons. It declared war not on an unapproved backyard structure, but on my daughter Lily and her right to simply be a child. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It wasn't in a normal envelope. It was in a stiff, cream-colored one with the embossed logo of the Oak Meadows Homeowners Association. It felt less like a piece of mail and more like a summons. My hands trembled slightly as I tore it open, already knowing, deep in my gut, that this was it. The war I had been trying to avoid was finally being declared. Inside, the language was cold, corporate, and utterly devoid of humanity. It spoke of unapproved structures, violation of aesthetic bylaws, and potential negative impact on neighborhood property values. But I knew what it was really about. It was about my daughter, Lily. My Lily is 6 years old. She is the sun, the moon, and all the stars in my sky. She has a laugh that can cure any bad day, and a smile that could melt glaciers. She also has a large, deep purple birthmark, a port wine stain, that covers the left side of her face, from her temple down to her jaw. It's part of a condition that also gives her seizures and some developmental delays. She is perfect. But to some people she is different. And different in a neighborhood like Oak Meadows is a liability. The unapproved structure they were referring to was the custom-built accessible playground I was installing in our backyard. It wasn't some garish plastic monstrosity. It was beautifully crafted from cedarwood, with a low incline ramp instead of a ladder, a sensory wall, and swings with special harnesses. I'd sunk most of my savings into it. After years of watching Lily struggle at public parks, getting stared at, or being unable to use the equipment, I wanted to build her a sanctuary, a place where she and her friends from her special needs therapy group could just be kids, safe and happy. The problem started with Brenda. Of course, it started with Brenda. She lived 2 houses down, was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, and patrolled the neighborhood in her golf cart like a pint-sized dictator. The moment the first post went into the ground, she was at my door. She didn't ask what it was. She told me it was an eyesore. I tried to explain, to show her the plans, to talk about Lily. She just looked past me, her eyes scanning my backyard with disgust. "This isn't that kind of neighborhood," she'd said, her voice dripping with implication. Over the next few weeks it escalated. Brenda launched a campaign. Emails were sent. A private Facebook group was started. I saw the whispers when I checked the mail. The way other parents would pull their kids a little closer when Lily and I walked by. The gossip twisted my beautiful, loving project into something ugly. They said I was building a public facility in my backyard. They said it would bring those kinds of children into their pristine cul-de-sacs. They used words like nuisance and liability, all coded language for their real fear. Their perfect, homogeneous world was being threatened by a little girl with a birthmark on her face. The letter was a formal demand to cease construction and attend a mandatory community meeting to discuss the matter. My lawyer said they didn't have a legal leg to stand on, but he warned me it would get ugly. He was right. The night of the meeting, the community hall felt like a courtroom where I was already judged and sentenced. The air was thick with hostility. I saw Brenda at the front, flanked by her cronies, a smug smirk on her face. I had decided to bring Lily with me. I didn't want to hide her. This was about her, and she deserved to be there, even if she didn't understand the specifics. I sat her in the back row with her favorite coloring book and some crayons, telling her daddy just had to talk to some neighbors and we'd get ice cream after. Brenda took the podium. She launched into a polished presentation, complete with a PowerPoint. She showed pictures of our backyard, photos of perfectly manicured lawns, and then a slide with a big, red X over a stock image of a playground. She spoke of unity, of community standards, of protecting their investment. The crowd nodded along, their faces grim and self-righteous. My blood was boiling. My fists clenched so tight my knuckles were white. Then she delivered the final blow. She clicked to a new slide, a close-up photo she must have taken from her window of my unfinished playground. "We have to ask ourselves," she said, her voice oozing fake sympathy, "if we want our neighborhood to become a place that attracts certain elements. Do we want our children exposed to things that might be unsettling? This isn't just a structure. It's an open invitation for all sorts of issues. She didn't have to say Lily's name. Everyone knew. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her cruel words hanging in the air. A few people started to clap, a slow, ugly, validating applause. I felt a wave of hot, white rage wash over me. I was about to stand up, to scream, to tear them all apart with my words. But before I could move, a different sound cut through the room. It wasn't the clapping. It was small, quiet, and clear. A chair scraped against the linoleum floor. From the back of the room, my 6-year-old daughter, Lily, stood up on her chair so she could see over the rows of people. She wasn't coloring anymore. Her crayons were forgotten. She had heard everything, and she had something to say. The clapping sputtered out like a dying engine. One by one, the hands fell silent. Every head in that sterile community hall turned towards the back, towards the sound of a single, small chair scraping against the floor. My heart didn't just stop. It felt like it was ripped from my chest and thrown on the ground. Time seemed to warp, stretching the moment into an agonizing eternity. There, standing on her chair, was my daughter. My tiny, fierce Lily, her small body silhouetted against the harsh fluorescent lights. Her coloring book lay open on the table, a half-finished rainbow forgotten. All her focus, all her 6-year-old intensity, was aimed like a laser at the front of the room, right at Brenda. Brenda, who was frozen mid-speech, her mouth slightly agape, the smug satisfaction wiped clean from her face. I saw a flicker of confusion, then annoyance. She saw a disruption. I saw the bravest person I had ever known. Lily's voice, when it came, wasn't a shout. It was just her normal talking voice, a childish treble that cut through the thick, hateful silence with the purity of a wind chime. She pointed a small, steady finger at the PowerPoint screen, at the picture of her unfinished sanctuary with the big red X through it. "That's for my friends," she said, her words simple, clear, and utterly devastating. She looked directly at Brenda, her head tilted with genuine, heartbreaking curiosity. "Why can't my friends come play?" A wave of something unreadable washed over the room. It was a physical thing, a collective intake of breath, a rustle of clothing as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I saw a woman in the second row cover her mouth with her hand. I saw a man who had been nodding vigorously at Brenda's speech suddenly find the floor fascinating. No one could meet my daughter's gaze. They couldn't face the simple, innocent truth she had just laid bare for everyone to see. She hadn't heard the coded language about property values or aesthetic bylaws. She had heard the one thing that mattered. A grown-up didn't want her friends to come over. Brenda's composure cracked. "Well, sweetie," she began, her voice a sickly sweet condescension that made my skin crawl. "This is grown-up talk. It's about rules, not about play dates." I couldn't stay silent a second longer. The rage I'd felt before was gone, replaced by a wave of protective love so powerful it felt like it could move mountains. I walked calmly from my seat to the back of the room, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I reached Lily and gently lifted her off the chair and into my arms. She wrapped her small arms around my neck and buried her face in my shoulder for a moment, then peeked back out at the room, her eyes wide. I kissed the beautiful purple mark on her cheek, a deliberate gesture for everyone to see. This is her. This is my daughter. She is not a nuisance or an issue. Holding her tight, I turned to face them all. My voice was low, but I made sure it carried. "My daughter asked a question," I said, looking not at Brenda but at the faces in the crowd. The neighbors who used to wave, the people I saw at the grocery store. She doesn't understand bylaws, but she understands being left out. She understands that some people stare at her face, and she understands that she just wants a place to play with her friends. Friends who, yes, might need a ramp because they're in a wheelchair. Friends who might not talk much but can communicate with their hands. Friends who are just kids. A man in the back cleared his throat. "He's right, Brenda," he said gruffly. "This has gone too far." A woman near him nodded. "She's just a little girl." The murmur of agreement started to swell. It was a tide turning. I could see panic flashing in Brenda's eyes. She was losing control. Her carefully constructed argument about property values was being washed away by the simple, undeniable humanity of a 6-year-old girl. She fumbled with her papers on the podium, her face flushing a deep, angry red. "This is not over," she hissed, her voice sharp and brittle. "You people are so sentimental. You have no idea what you're inviting into this community. This isn't about one little girl's feelings." She snatched a thick folder from the podium and slammed it down. "This is about the legally binding covenants you all signed when you bought your precious homes." She ripped the folder open and pulled out a sheaf of papers, waving them in the air like a battle standard. "This isn't just my opinion. This is a formal petition to enforce the bylaws signed by more than half the households in Oak Meadows." She started reading names aloud, her voice dripping with venom. The Millers, the Patels, the Garcias. People who just moments ago were looking at me with sympathy, now shrank in their seats, their faces pale with shame. She had them trapped. Then she delivered the final venomous strike. "And the petition doesn't just demand the removal of the unapproved structure," she spat, her eyes locking onto mine with pure, unadulterated malice. "It demands a formal board review of any household found in gross violation of community standards to determine if their continued residency is in the best interest of the association." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Continued residency. She wasn't just trying to tear down a playground anymore. She was trying to evict us. She was trying to use a rule book to kick a sick child and her father out of their home. The room went dead silent again, but this time it wasn't a silence of discomfort. It was a silence of shock. The murmurs of support for me died in people's throats. Brenda had weaponized their own signatures against them, turning their petty grievances about lawn aesthetics into a public threat against my family. I held Lily tighter, her small body trembling slightly against mine. She didn't understand the words, but she could feel the venom. She could feel the shift in the room as fear, cold and sharp, replaced the brief warmth of empathy. Brenda's eyes scanned the crowd, her lips curled into a triumphant sneer. She had them. She had exposed their hypocrisy, and now they were complicit. To defy her now would be to defy their own signed declaration. My mind raced. My lawyer had warned me about Brenda, about her ruthlessness, but I hadn't imagined this. This was a new level of cruelty. Kicking us out? On what grounds? Gross violation of community standards. What did that even mean? It meant whatever Brenda and her hand-picked board wanted it to mean. It was a blank check for discrimination, dressed up in legalese. For a moment I felt a crushing wave of despair. I looked around at the faces of my neighbors. The Millers, who had borrowed our lawnmower last month. The Garcias, whose son had a lemonade stand Lily and I always made a point to visit. They had signed a petition that could make my daughter homeless. Their eyes were glued to the floor, to their hands, to anything but me. The shame radiating from them was palpable, but so was their fear. Brenda held all the power. I had to do something. I couldn't let her win. I couldn't let this poison infect my daughter's world. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "You can't be serious, Brenda," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I was barely containing. "You would really try to throw a family out of their home because you don't like their swing set?" "It's not a swing set. It's an unapproved commercial-grade structure," she snapped back, her voice like cracking ice. "And this is no longer about my personal feelings. It's about upholding the rules that protect all of our property values. The petition is legally binding. The board has no choice but to act on it." She gestured to the 3 grim-faced people sitting at the table next to her. Her board. Her puppets. It felt hopeless. It was my word against a stack of signed papers and a binder full of bylaws. Reason and compassion had left the building. All that remained was Brenda's iron-fisted rule. I felt Lily stir in my arms. She turned her head and looked up at me, her big brown eyes filled with confusion and a touch of fear. She whispered so quietly only I could hear, "Daddy, I want to go home." Those 4 words were like a shot of adrenaline to my heart. This was our home. I had brought her into this house as a baby. Her height chart was marked on the kitchen doorframe. Her first painting was framed on the living room wall. No one, especially not this hateful, bitter woman, was going to take that from us. My gaze fell on Mr. Henderson, an elderly man who lived at the end of the cul-de-sac. He was a widower, a retired carpenter who mostly kept to himself. I'd always found him a bit gruff, but he'd once spent an hour fixing the chain on Lily's tricycle without my even asking. His name hadn't been on Brenda's list. He was just watching, his face unreadable. I decided to make one last appeal, not to Brenda, but to the ghosts of decency I hoped still haunted that room. "Look at her," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. I gently turned Lily so she was facing the crowd. "Just look at my daughter. Is this what Oak Meadows is about? Is this the community you want to live in? One where we use rules to hurt a child? To punish her for being different?" Brenda scoffed. "Oh, spare us the melodrama. This is about contracts, not your personal sob story." But before she could continue her tirade, a new voice cut through the tension. It was quiet, raspy with age, but it commanded immediate attention. "That's enough, Brenda." Every eye in the room swiveled to the corner where Mr. Henderson was slowly getting to his feet, using a sturdy oak cane to push himself up. He wasn't looking at me or Lily. His piercing blue eyes were locked directly on Brenda, and for the first time that night, I saw Brenda falter. "Excuse me, Arthur," she said, her tone laced with disbelief. "You heard me," Mr. Henderson said, his voice gaining strength as he stood straighter. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. "You've been waving that petition around like it's gospel. You said it was signed by more than half the households, is that right?" "That's correct," Brenda said, puffing out her chest. 52% to be exact. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. "I see. Well, that's interesting." He reached into the inner pocket of his worn tweed jacket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It looked old, the creases soft and deep. "Because I happen to have a copy of the original Oak Meadows covenants, the ones that were drafted and signed in 1978, the ones every subsequent amendment, including your precious aesthetic bylaws, are based upon." He unfolded the paper with care, his gnarled fingers smoothing it out on the table in front of him. "And I think you all might be very interested in reading Article 1, Section C." Brenda stared at the old, yellowed piece of paper in Mr. Henderson's hand as if it were a venomous snake. "What is that?" she demanded, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "All official documents are kept on file at the HOA office. That's just a piece of paper." Mr. Henderson gave a dry chuckle that seemed to rattle in his chest. "This, my dear Brenda, is a copy of the charter I helped draft with the other 5 original families who built this neighborhood. My signature is right there at the bottom. Arthur Henderson. Before you were even a glint in your father's eye, we were deciding what kind of community this would be." He tapped a specific paragraph with a deliberate, trembling finger. "And we were very, very clear on one thing." He didn't need a microphone. His voice, honed by decades of workshop commands and grandfatherly pronouncements, filled the room. He read from the paper, his tone slow and emphatic. Article 1, Section C. The primary and inviolable purpose of the Oak Meadows Association is to foster a safe, welcoming, and supportive environment for all residents, with special consideration and accommodation given to families with children and residents with physical or medical disabilities. No bylaw, amendment, or enforcement action shall ever be enacted or interpreted in a way that fundamentally contradicts this primary purpose. He lifted his gaze from the paper and swept it across the stunned faces in the room. "We didn't build this neighborhood to police the color of people's mailboxes or to measure the height of their grass. We built it to be a community, a place where you help your neighbor fix a fence, not sue him over it. We put that clause in specifically to prevent the association from ever becoming what you have turned it into, Brenda, a weapon for bullies." The silence that followed was profound. It was the sound of 50 years of history dropping a bomb on Brenda's petty kingdom. The petition she held, the bylaws she worshipped, they were all rendered meaningless, subordinate to this single, forgotten principle of human decency. Brenda's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. That's archaic. It's meaningless. We have modern bylaws." "It's the foundation of every modern bylaw you have," Mr. Henderson retorted, his voice steely. "And any lawyer worth his salt will tell you that a foundational clause like that supersedes any subsequent amendment that violates its spirit. Your petition, your threat of eviction, it's all based on a violation of the very first rule in the book. It's null and void." A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. I looked at Mr. Henderson, this quiet man I barely knew, and felt a surge of overwhelming gratitude. He had been sitting on this trump card the whole time, waiting for the perfect moment. The tide didn't just turn, it became a tsunami. The man who had first spoken up for me stood and said, "Brenda, I want my name taken off that petition. Right now." Another person followed, then another. "Mine too." "And ours." The room erupted in a chorus of people demanding to retract their signatures, their voices filled with a mixture of shame and newfound courage. They were no longer afraid of Brenda. They were ashamed of having ever followed her. Brenda stood frozen, her stack of papers suddenly as worthless as confetti. Her face crumpled, the smug mask falling away to reveal someone small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. She gathered her things with jerky, uncoordinated movements and practically fled the room without another word, her board members trailing behind her like spooked ducklings. In the aftermath, something beautiful happened. People didn't just leave. They came up to me, to Lily. The Millers apologized profusely. Mrs. Garcia, with tears in her eyes, gave Lily a hug and promised her a lifetime supply of lemonade. One by one, they came forward, not just with apologies, but with offers of help. A contractor in the crowd offered to help me finish the playground for free. A landscaper offered to plant flowers around it. It was as if Mr. Henderson's words had reminded them all of why they'd chosen to live here in the first place. The next Saturday, our backyard was filled with people. Not just Lily's friends from her therapy group, but kids from all over the neighborhood. I watched as the son of the man who'd signed the petition pushed a little girl in a wheelchair up the new ramp. I saw Brenda's former cronies laying down fresh mulch. Mr. Henderson sat on my porch, sipping an iced tea, a gentle smile on his face as he watched the scene. He'd done more than just win a legal argument. He had reminded a community of its own heart. Lily was in the middle of it all, her face alight with pure joy. The deep purple birthmark that had been the unspoken reason for all the hate was just another part of her radiant smile. She wasn't an issue or an unsettling element. She was just Lily, a little girl playing in her backyard, surrounded by friends. That afternoon, the sound of her laughter, mixed with the happy shouts of dozens of other children, echoed through Oak Meadows. It was the sound of community, the sound of acceptance, the sound of one small brave voice, first Lily's, then Mr. Henderson's, that had been powerful enough to silence a crowd and remind them how to be neighbors again.